Welcome to the BlackburnNews.com debate for the riding of London West. I'm your moderator, Scott Kitching, and I'm joined today by three of the candidates in London West. We have Kate Young from the Liberal Party of Canada, we have Matthew Rowlinson from the New Democratic Party, and we have Dimitri Lascaris from the Green Party of Canada. Candidates, thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, Ed Holder of the Conservative Party of Canada declined our invitation to participate in the debate today, so we miss Ed, but we're happy to go ahead with the three candidates that we have today. We're going to start with opening statements from each candidate, which will last about 2 minutes. Candidates have the timer set on my trusty little iPhone here, so when you hear the beep, or I guess it's the ping from the iPhone, you'll know that your 2 minutes are up. We drew the order in which the opening statements will be given prior to the debate. We start with Kate Young of the Liberal Party of Canada. Kate, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you to Blackburn Radio for hosting this video debate. I'm Kate Young, and I am running as the Liberal candidate in London West because I am concerned about the future of this city and the lack of opportunities and confidence that we have in this region. And I care deeply about London West. My parents moved here when I was 3 years old. I grew up here, I raised my family in London West, and I live here now. And we've always known London to be a great place to raise a family, and I'm blessed to have my son, daughter-in-law, and twin grandsons living close by in Old South. I want my grandsons to have the same opportunities and advantages that my children had growing up here, but I believe that's eroding very quickly. And we can't simply point our finger at the municipal or provincial levels of government for all of our problems. The lack of leadership in Ottawa is affecting us here in London, and it can't continue. We deserve better, and I believe a federal Liberal government has the plan to restore confidence in London West and help families thrive. A Liberal government has a 3-point plan: create jobs with the most significant infrastructure investment in Canadian history, grow the middle class by raising taxes on the wealthiest Canadians, that's the 1%, and cutting taxes for middle-income Canadians, and also help those working hard to join the middle class by investing in essential social infrastructure, including affordable housing and childcare, as well as providing more money to help families with the high cost of raising their kids. I believe a Liberal government is offering the change we need at this time in Canadian history. I'm Kate Young, the federal Liberal candidate in London West, and I am asking for your support on October 19th. Thank you.
Kate, thank you so much. Now, Matthew Rowlinson of the NDP.
Thanks very much, Scott, and thanks to Blackburn for hosting this event. It's terrific to be here. I want to begin by saying I'm sorry that Ed Holder couldn't join us, and I think the Conservatives' refusal to attend so many debates says something about their relation with the electorate. I think they've lost touch, and I think this election is going to be to a very big extent a referendum on the performance of the Conservative government since 2007, and a debate about the way forward, the way to undo some of the damage they've done. I'm a professor of English at Western. I've lived in London West in the riding since 2002. And I've got to say, the main reason I'm running is that the years I've lived here have been pretty tough ones for this city. We've had a lot of plant closures, electromotive diesel, Ford, Kellogg's most recently, and our infrastructure has really suffered a serious deterioration. The housing situation in the city is reaching a crisis. So while I've been going to door to door in London during the campaign, I've met a lot of people who've been laid off, and some of them are still looking for work. And even the ones who have jobs are now in low-wage service jobs. The jobs that have been coming back to London are not the kind of jobs we used to have, that you could raise a family on and own a home and build the kind of middle-class lifestyle that I think Londoners want. Under this Conservative government, there are 200,000 more Canadians out of work than before the crash in 2008. Under this Conservative government, we've been the only country in the world to drop out of the Kyoto Accord on climate change. Mr. Harper's record on climate change and in general his foreign policy has made this country much less respected in the world than it used to be. And I have to say that the Liberals are not being clear on how they plan to fix Mr. Harper's mess. They won't say how they're going to pay for their promises, and they won't support key measures that will help families here. They're campaigning against $15 a day childcare, and they're campaigning against the $15 minimum wage. They don't have a plan to address the challenge of climate change.
Okay. There's 2 minutes. Thank you, Matthew. Dimitri Lascaris of the Green Party of Canada, thank you for joining us today, and your opening statement.
Thank you, Scott. In this pivotal election, I have spoken with many Londoners, and those conversations have filled me with hope. Londoners understand that we are at a critical moment in human history, not just Canadian history, but human history. And toward that end, they ask, how do we end the reign of the worst Prime Minister of our lifetimes, Stephen Harper? This is, of course, a vital question, but there is a question that is even more vital. Who will replace Stephen Harper? If we replace him with a leader whose agenda differs only marginally from his, our election will have served little purpose. Sadly, the Liberals and NDP are parties of the status quo. Nowhere is this more obvious than in regard to the defining challenge of our time, climate change. 2014 was the hottest year in 135 years of record keeping. 2015 is on course to smash last year's record. Even worse, scientists recently concluded that the Greenland ice sheet is shedding over 300 billion tons a year. If it melts completely, it will raise global sea levels by an average of 6 meters, devastating major coastal cities around the world. And recent peer-reviewed studies, scientific studies, establish that in order to avoid apocalyptic climate change, we must leave the majority of the oil in the ground. This is the legacy of years of conservative, and I want to underline this, liberal inaction on climate change. And what do the Liberals and NDP now say about climate change? They want to expand, not freeze tar sands development. And Justin Trudeau openly supports the building of the Keystone XL pipeline and the Energy East pipeline that will speed that expansion. Justin Trudeau and Tom Mulcair think that if you stick the adjective sustainable in front of the words oil sands, then you have solved the climate crisis. I have news for them. An adjective will not save us. The Green Party opposes tar sands expansion and tar sands pipelines. We want to price carbon fairly in order to incent industry to invest massively in the industry of the future, renewable energy. Studies show that we can convert the entire planet to renewable energy before 2050. It can be done. All we need is the will to do it. Thank you.
Right on, 2 minutes. Thank you, Dimitri. We move on now to the question period of our debate. And as we talked about earlier, how this is going to work is I will ask a question to a given candidate. That candidate will have about 2 minutes to give an answer, and then we open up the floor for a few minutes of debate. Again, we did this by kind of random draw. And the first question is to Kate Young of the Liberal Party. And this is a question about the economy. Kate, it's often said that the best form of social assistance is a job. The unemployment rate in the London area was 6.9% in August, down significantly from the 9.9% that we saw during the recession in 2009. But many argue we're in a technical recession now, and there is concern that the jobless rate locally could climb again. Now, rightly or wrongly, payroll taxes are often cited as barriers to hiring new workers. In the 2015 budget, the Harper government said it will drop EI premiums to $1.49 per $100 earned by 2017. Your party's plan calls for $1.65. How do you convince business owners, the job creators, as it were, that your plan is the right one?
Thank you very much, Scott, for that very important question about the economy and about how small businesses work, how we keep building our economy. And what we do need to do is to get people working again, so that, of course, if we have people working, then they're paying taxes. So the Liberal plan is based on a number of ways of getting southwestern Ontario working again, because I'm very concerned about what's happened in this area, and I think it's because of the failure of the Harper government to really take hold and do something about the manufacturing jobs that we have lost in southwestern Ontario. With that said, I think what we need to do is to get infrastructure money into this city, to get people who are out of work working again. We need to make sure that the Liberal Party is planning to put more money into the coffers of municipalities by giving billions of dollars. The largest infrastructure program in Canadian history is going to be unfolded. And once that money is released, it will be rolled out from the federal government to the provinces and then given to municipalities, and they'll be able to decide how to spend that money. And once that money is in the hands of municipalities, then we can get more people working. And I think that's the most important thing to have happen in Ontario and in London, in southwestern Ontario, is to get people working.
Okay, now we open it up for a few minutes of debate, and I want to start with you, Dimitri. I mentioned payroll taxes. Where does the Green Party stand on what is the appropriate level of EI premium that business owners, particularly small business owners, should be facing? And do you believe that, you know, the higher the EI premium, the greater the barrier to hiring new workers?
Well, we're not focused so much on the existing system. What we want to do is we want to introduce a guaranteed livable income. And I want to put the emphasis on the word livable. So the people of our country shouldn't have to live beneath the poverty line. There's no reason why Canada is one of the richest countries in the world should have poverty. And we want to ensure that every single citizen, through a program of guaranteed livable income, has the means in order to have a decent life. And we can provide that. And we think we can provide it by increasing the corporate tax rate in this country, which is at the lowest level in the past 30 years. It's now at 15%. It's less than half of the corporate tax rate in the United States, which is, of course, not a socialist country. It has been slashed repeatedly by the Liberals and Conservatives, and it is starving us of the essential revenue that we need to lift people out of poverty, to solve the homelessness crisis in this country, to give our kids a good education, an accessible education, and to rebuild our infrastructure.
Matthew, $1.49 per $100 earned, what the Conservatives are looking at, $1.65 what the Liberals are looking at. First, let me ask you where the NDP stands on that. And second, do you see, and maybe I'll get Kate to reply to your answer, do you see a great deal of difference between the Conservatives and the Liberal Party when it comes to their approach to creating an atmosphere in which businesses and industry are able to hire new workers?
Well, let's begin with the last question first. No, I don't see a great deal of difference. And I mean, let me respond to some of what you've asked about EI. EI is an insurance program. It's not a tax. And the NDP's position is that employment insurance is actually itself a job creation program. People who manage to stay on EI after losing their jobs do better, and they have a better chance of being rehired into a good job than the many, many people who are now currently losing their EI too quickly. Cuts to EI began under Paul Martin's last Liberal government, and they've continued under the Conservatives. The NDP has no plans to cut EI any further, and we would certainly want to enhance the program. The real key to jobs here is not, and Dimitri's already said this, the real key to building jobs here in Southwest Ontario is not tax cuts and subsidies to large multinational corporations. That's the road that's been tried by the Liberals and the Conservatives the last 2 decades, and we know what the result has been. 400,000 manufacturing jobs have left Canada. The key to building jobs here is to build our infrastructure and to support small, local businesses in sustainable fields. They're the future, they're doing most of the hiring, and they will stay here.
Kate, we've got about 2 minutes. You wanted to jump in there?
Well, I certainly agree that we need to keep taxes for small business owners down. We're dropping that from 11 to 9%, and that's key because we know that small businesses are very important to our economy. Also, something that's also a very big concern is skills training, and I think the Conservative government has dropped the ball on this, and they're not investing enough in skills training. We've lost so many manufacturing jobs in the London area, and then there are people who are out there looking for work, but they don't have the skills, so they need the training. And the Liberal government is going to have a $750 million annual increase in funding for training programs, and that will help all of the communities like London that are really suffering. And we also need to look at the medium-sized entrepreneurs and help them grow, along with trying to create more jobs that have been just left Southwestern Ontario. We've got Kellogg's, we've got Ford, and when I go door knocking, I talk to people all the time, and I'm sure Dimitri and Matthew do the same thing, and people are hurting in Southwestern Ontario. And the Conservatives can say that things are all rosy, but that is wrong, and we have got to come to grips with this problem because it is a growing problem in Southwestern Ontario.
Thank you, Kate. Next question is on the issue of healthcare, and this question is for you, Matthew. Canada's healthcare system, while not perfect, is something that most Canadians, regardless of their political stripe, can certainly be proud of. Unlike our neighbors to the south, we tend not to hear stories about people having to mortgage their homes to pay their hospital bills. However, our system has a very hefty price tag, and it's one that keeps on growing, and it will continue to grow. The Harper government says it wants to get annual spending increases down to 3%. Your party says it would maintain the yearly increases of 6%. How do we pay for that?
Yeah, I didn't realize the question was going to end with a question which is actually about taxes. The NDP's position on how we're going to pay for our programs is very clear. We are the only one of the three national parties to have released a fully costed fiscal statement describing all our proposed expenditures and revenue sources. So, our main revenue sources will be an increase in the corporate tax rate paid by large corporations. We're also going to roll back some of Mr. Harper's tax giveaways in his last budget. And that's how we're going to pay to sustain the level of healthcare spending that Canadians need going forward. This is a graying population. It's a growing population. There's no way that declines in the rate of increase of our healthcare funding that the federal government provides the provinces are going to sustain even the current level of services. And the current level of service is not adequate. We have real deficiencies in many areas of our healthcare system. Mental health care is a huge problem. We have people who go into emergency rooms at risk of self-harm, who go into emergency rooms in crisis and are not seen. I'm sorry if I'm running over, but one last point. We have a real need for home care. We have enormous numbers of outpatients and seniors who should be getting home care, who are taking up beds in our hospitals. That's both wasteful of money, and it's also extraordinarily inhumane. It's a poor standard of care for those patients. Those three areas are specific areas that the NDP wants to target. The final thing our healthcare needs is a federal government that's engaged. Mr. Harper has made it very clear that he really doesn't think healthcare is a federal responsibility, and he would like to offload all responsibility for the system onto the provinces. Tom Mulcair will be a Prime Minister who is engaged in healthcare, who, unlike Harper, will meet with the premiers and once again bring our healthcare together as a federal responsibility, as a shared national project.
Thank you, Matthew. We'll open it up now, and Dimitri, I'd like to start with you. The Green Party's healthcare plan, as I understand it, focuses, I don't know if focuses is the right word, but there's a heavy emphasis on preventative healthcare. Would a Green Party government, I suppose, work closely with the provinces in hopes of convincing them to adopt that kind of more preventative sort of focus rather than treatment? And how would you go about that?
Well, we are absolutely determined to work more closely with provinces, and we want to get back to the practice of having annual meetings with the provinces and bring also First Nations who have real healthcare issues to cope with to the table as equal partners. We think that's absolutely essential. And yes, you're right. It is very much about preventative healthcare. You talked about the statistics and the growth of demand, but how about talking not just about how you're going to fund the system so that it meets the demand, but reducing the demand for healthcare services. And that's what preventative healthcare is all about. One thing, for example, that we can do is end our dependence as quickly as possible on fossil fuels, because the extraction, refinement, and consumption of fossil fuels is introducing a massive amount of toxins, carcinogens into our environment. And we have in the society an epidemic of cancer, which is, of course, not just devastating to the people who suffer from it, but it's an enormous burden on our healthcare system. And if we can reduce that epidemic, that's not normal. What we have now is abnormal, and it's because our environment isn't healthy. When the environment becomes healthy, the demands on the healthcare system go down, and the funding issue becomes much more manageable.
Kate, I wanted to ask you this question, and guys, feel free to jump in. We are in a situation that in some ways mirrors what we were in when the government of Jean Chrétien came in. Now we are in a balanced budget right now, but we have seen deficits in the past.
We could argue that.
Yes, we could argue that, yeah.
Yes.
But when the Liberal government of Jean Chrétien came in, we were in a significant deficit situation. And one of the ways that deficit was dealt with was what many would argue were rather extreme cuts to health transfers by Finance Minister Paul Martin. Should we find ourselves in that situation again, What assurances could a Liberal government give that we would not see a repeat of that, where we saw those incredible pressures put on the provinces by the cutbacks in those transfers?
Well, yes, I know that the federal government has to take a leadership role, and I think that's something that I will agree with everyone here today, that it has been left with the Conservatives. They've just washed their hands of health care. And so I think a federal government, a federal Liberal government, would hold a First Minister's meeting to re-engage and collaborate and get talking with the provinces. And possibly that wasn't really done enough 10, 15, 20 years ago. We can't afford, as a country, whether it's federal or provincial governments, to overlook the healthcare system. We have to all work together to make sure that we have a good national healthcare system. Of course, we do give the money to the provinces, and that would, of course, continue. I can't speak to what former governments did. All I can say is what we're doing is we're looking to the future, and that Liberals believe that it is the federal government's responsibility to work collaboratively with the provinces and the territories and Indigenous communities as well. That's so important to tackle the health issues. And as Matthew mentioned, reducing the waiting times, all of these things that we must do. Senior care, mental health care, prescription drug coverage is another huge issue. We all have to work together. And I think that once we do, that we will have a better understanding of what the provinces need, and the federal government can help the provinces.
We've got about a minute, Matthew. Do you trust the Liberals when they say that we would not see those health transfers cut again like we saw before?
Well, that's a softball
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think
I wasn't going to word it. Okay, well, let's put it
No,
this way.
I'm
How
happy
do
to
you
take the
avoid it?
question. Is no,
Yeah.
I don't trust the
course.
Liberals. There are so many reasons not to trust the Liberals. The Liberals in the 1990s promised promised us pharmacare. We still don't have it. They promised us a child care plan. Now the NDP is the party that's promising those things. The Liberals, we know that Liberals run to the left and then govern from the right. Healthcare cuts from the Liberals are never something they tell us about in advance. They're always something they bring in after the fact. And we're seeing exactly the same playbook in this election from the federal Liberals as we saw from Kathleen Wynne's Liberals in the last provincial election, right? She promised us, she ran as the person who was going to run as premier, who was going to reform the pensions and was going to bring in a minimum wage, but she is governed as somebody who is selling off our public assets and benefiting investment bankers. That's what I expect from the federal Liberals as a federal Liberal government as well.
Quick response, Kate?
you mentioned off the top about the Liberal government not agreeing to your $15 a day child care plan. The point of it is that it's not going to be fully implemented. For years, young children today will never see, the parents of young children today will never have the opportunity to use that. The Liberal Party is coming out with a Canada Child Benefit and a middle-class tax cut that will get money into the hands of middle-income Canadians and all Canadian families right away, so that they can spend the money they need on childcare.
I'm gonna stop you on the child care front just because that's one of the questions that we've got.
Okay,
coming
but
up.
you mentioned it off the top,
yeah.
so I wanted to get that in there.
We'll debate the child care issue in just a moment. Next question is about infrastructure, and I know it's something that all of the parties are quite concerned about, and every level of government it seems quite concerned about this country's infrastructure. This question is for you, Dimitri. We hear a lot about our country's infrastructure and how it is in need of a great deal of attention, whether it's rail, roads, public transit, even high-speed internet access. I want to zero in on something specific, though, when it comes to infrastructure, and that is our highway system. We here in southwestern Ontario, so much of our region's economy is dependent on the 400 series highways, specifically the 401. Those highways are seeing a lot more truck traffic than they have in the past, with just-in-time delivery and so forth. That's leading to congestion. Some would argue it's leading to a higher risk of serious collisions. How would the Green Party address that?
Well, we first of all want to ensure that carbon is priced fairly, so that renewable forms of energy become more competitive. So we want to introduce a carbon price that fully reflects the cost of that, of the pollution that's being emitted or created by the carbon. And then that will incentivize the private sector to invest in renewable energy and infrastructure. With respect particularly to the question of auto transportation and truck transportation, we want to devote 1 point of GST, or $6.4 billion a year, to municipal infrastructure. And we want to, in particular, focus upon mass transit. We want to increase via rail usage. We want to start out by putting an additional $750 million or so into Via Rail to expand the service and increase the quality. And we want to up that in the following year. We want to, where feasible, introduce a high-speed rail system in this country, where feasible. And we basically want to deter the use of our road system by trucks and passenger vehicles, and give people an attractive option, as they have in Europe, throughout Europe, for public and mass transit, both for individual passengers and for goods. We think that's critical. This problem's not going to go away by continuing down the path that we have now, which is we just keep relentlessly expanding the road system. Eventually it becomes too congested, and then we engage in further expansion. Somewhere this has to stop. Then the key to that is mass transit and public transportation.
Thank you, Dimitri. Kate, let's go to you first. How realistic is it to have a radical shift in the way we, for example, ship goods in this area specifically? How do we get our manufacturers on board with looking at a different way to get their products from point A to point B that doesn't involve putting 18-wheelers on the 401?
Yeah, and there are a lot of 18-wheelers in the 401. Infrastructure, of course, if we don't keep up with our infrastructure, we're not going to be able to get goods to the market, no matter what way you're talking, whether it's rail or on the highways. And the Liberal government is proposing the largest infrastructure program in Canadian history. We have to do it now because interest rates are low, our infrastructure is crumbling, and we need to make sure that we invest in the people and the projects that we need. And whether it is the highways, it's up to the regional politicians to decide what's the best way to spend that money. So our plan is to invest almost $125 billion over the next decade, and that's nearly double what the current plan of investment from the Conservative government. So that money would be used in 3 different ways. Public transit, which is so important in London, we hear about that all the time. Will have more than triple the federal investment immediately to get our cities moving again. Social infrastructure, and that would be the housing and affordable housing, seniors facilities, that type of thing. And then green infrastructure, which would include clean energy and local water treatment centers and that type of thing. So, and housing, affordable housing, if I can go back to that just for a moment, we need to have a national housing strategy. And it's important to be able to get on top of this now. And the Conservatives have left it. It's just as if they don't care about what is happening to our major cities. And London is a major city, and we have too many homeless here, and we have got to find them affordable housing.
Matthew, as Dimitri said, this problem is not going away anytime soon. And it's a problem that's existed for some time. I would presume that your party would hold the position that the Conservatives and the Liberals before them could have done a better job on this. How would the NDP do things differently than what has been done or not done over the last, let's say, 20 years?
Well, this began as a question specifically about transport infrastructure, and I will come back to that. But let me begin by agreeing with Kate that we need a national housing strategy. We see the result of the federal government getting out of the business of supporting social housing on our streets every day. If you have family members, young family members who are trying to live in Toronto or Vancouver, we know the issues of affordability there. But I want to remind your listeners that we had a national housing strategy until Paul Martin brought it to an end in the last Liberal government. The federal government needs to get back into the business of supporting social housing, but we can't trust the Liberals to do it. The NDP has a very concrete plan to support co-op housing, to begin to work with the municipalities to build affordable housing, rental units and units for sale that our cities need. Let's turn to transit. Yeah, congestion is a huge problem, and probably I think I read that the city of Toronto has the worst traffic in the world. Transit congestion is estimated to cost 11 billion in the GTA. I will say the NDP is committed to the idea that better public transit is the way forward here. That includes municipal public transit, and we very much want to support the SHIFT program that's being developed here in London. We also want to support rail traffic. Not necessarily the high-speed rail. I mean, Kathleen Wynne has promised high-speed rail. Best bet, she's promising it maybe by 2029, and I don't think we'll ever see it, not the way the Liberal government is going now. Rather, we can work efficiently and economically with existing infrastructure that needs to be maintained. We can build an integrated transit network for the whole of Southwest Ontario that includes buses and trains at a reasonable cost. And the NDP is about extending our transport infrastructure, maintaining what we have, rather than engaging in mega projects that are going to require public-private participation, and that all too often have ended in boondoggles in the past.
Okay, Kate, did you want to respond to anything Matthew said?
Well, I think I'm glad he agrees that we need a national housing strategy, and everything starts with affordable housing and safe housing. And 1 in 4 Canadians pay more than they can afford for housing. 1 in 8 can't find adequate housing. So whatever happened in the past, happened in the past. What I'm saying is what we need to do now and moving forward.
Okay, and any, sure, yeah, I sit on the board of the Unity Project for Relief of Homelessness in London. So I'm quite familiar with the scourge of homelessness and the absolutely vital need for a national strategy on housing. But this is particularly why we think a guaranteed livable income is an idea whose time has come. This will certainly greatly alleviate, if not eliminate altogether, the problem of homelessness in this country. And there's absolutely no reason, as I said at the outset, why we can't fund a guaranteed livable income by restoring corporate tax levels. And I'm talking here about taxation on large corporations, not small businesses, to something that is more reasonable and comparable to the US. We want to take it up to 19% to fund that kind of a program, including a national housing strategy. Whereas you have the Liberals wanting to keep it at its rock bottom level, the lowest in the industrialized world, and the NDP only wants to take it up to 17% and do that very gradually. If we're going to actually deal with the problem of homelessness, we need to fund it properly.
Okay, next question. We're into our second round now, and this one is about the environment. And this question is for you, Kate. When it comes to the environment, Canada, it could be argued, is in a little bit of a tough spot relative to deal with cutting emissions, is going to be felt by 2 of the biggest sectors of our economy, oil and gas and manufacturing. How do you find a middle ground between reducing emissions and supporting industry?
I think you must be pragmatic. I think we must be able to balance the economy and the environment. We can't just have one or the other. We can have both. What is most important as far as whether it's climate change, clean technologies, we have to make sure that whoever wins this election, that party, the leader, and I will certainly hope that it's Justin Trudeau, goes to the Paris conference in early December. That is so key to the future of our country, of our world. So much will be decided at that conference, and we need to have a partner with the provinces and the federal government. And I've said this before, but it is so key to establish national emissions targets and ensure that we have targeted federal funding and flexibility to design the provinces to design their own policies to meet these commitments, and that's essential, including the provinces should have their own carbon pricing policies.
Okay, let's go to you, Dimitri, for a response. How do you find that balance, and maybe you talk a bit about how the Green Party would be the best party to find that balance between reducing emissions while at the same time not doing so in a manner that for want of a better phrase, cripples industry?
Well, the good news is we are not confronted by a choice between jobs and resolving the climate crisis. We can actually create jobs, and more jobs than the oil industry currently has created, and resolve the climate crisis at the same time. For every $1 million that is invested in renewable energy, 15 jobs are created. For every $1 million put into the fossil fuels industry, 2 jobs are created. In Germany, which has invested far more in the renewable energy sector and has a population that's a little more than twice as large as Canada's, they have 370,000 people employed in the renewable energy sector directly. In this country, the number is less than 25,000, so we're just scraping the surface. And that number, by the way, is a little higher. Despite the fact that it's so low relative to Germany, the number of 24,000 or so renewable energy jobs is still higher, slightly, than the number of jobs directly created by the tar sands industry. So, and the other thing I'll say about that industry, the oil industry, is that it's only responsible for 2% of GDP. But at the end of the day, if you price carbon fairly, with a national strategy, not some patchwork idea that Justin Trudeau has put forward, then you're going to have private industry investing massively in renewable energy because it'll be much more competitive. It's already becoming competitive on its own without government assistance, but it can be made much more competitive with the simple principle, the simple economically fair and sensible principle that the polluter must pay. And I just have a question for Ms. Young, and I have a question for Mr. Rowlinson. I'd like them to answer this directly. If you're serious about climate change, and if the science is telling us, as it is, that we have to leave the majority of the oil in the ground in order to avoid temperature increases in excess of 2 degrees Celsius, which is our commitment, and I take it your parties agree with that commitment, how are you going to do that at the same time as you expand the tar sands? And I'd ask you for a concrete explanation of how you're going to do that, if you're really serious about tackling the defining crisis of our time.
Let's start with you, Matthew.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here, but I'm going to begin. I know politicians aren't supposed to do this. I'm going to begin by directly answering Dimitri's question. The NDP is running to form a government. That means taking account of real world. The oil sands currently produce roughly 2.2 million barrels of oil per day. Now, permits have already been issued. The permits have already been issued, and a lot of the investment has already been made to more than double that production. The projected rise in the oil sands production, and the timeline isn't clear because oil prices are so in flux at the moment. The projected rise is to about 5 million. Those permits have already been sold. Anybody running for office who tells you that they can form a government that will reduce oil sands production next year or the year after below what it is this year is not recognizing the investments and the legally binding contracts that have already been signed. So oil sands production will continue to rise for the next few years, no question about it. And the question we face, therefore, as a country is how to deal with that rise in a sustainable way. One answer to that question has to be then, how is that oil going to be moved? Tom Mulcair has said that what we need is a serious, unlike the Conservative, we need a serious review process of every environmental project, pipelines, new projects going forward, so that we can move Canada's oil to market in a safe way and keep the jobs that are produced by oil production here at home. At the same time as we do that, and here I completely agree with Dimitri, at the same time as we do that, we must move to an economy based on sustainable energy sources. And yes, it's a false choice to say that we have to choose between a strong economy and an environment and a sustainable one. On the contrary, the jobs of the future are in sustainable fields. And that's where London is in such a great position, because we have awesome small companies emerging in digital technology, in composite technology, in water purification. These are fields where we have companies growing in London, and these are where the jobs of the future are going to come from.
Kate, I'll get you to respond to Dimitri's question as well.
I really wish Ed Holder was here to answer some of these, because this is something that the Conservative government has again just left us without any, we're so far behind. We've lost 10 years as far as the environment is concerned. And if they had just been able to recognize that climate change is real and do something about it, we wouldn't be where we are today. But we are, and we have to be realistic about how we're going to move forward. I did want to mention that Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Dr. Gordon McBain, who is a Western climatologist, has come out to endorse the Liberal platform on the environment, and he is endorsing my campaign. And I think that says a lot about how scientists feel about the Liberal platform, that it is balanced, it is measured, and it will work.
If I may.
Yes, please.
I have a great deal of respect for Professor McBean, but in 2013 he signed a letter addressed to Joe Oliver at the time, in which he criticized the whole notion that the tar sands industry needed to be expanded and that we needed to build pipeline infrastructure. Now, maybe this election he's decided he's going to do something strategic by supporting the Liberal Party, but he's clear and he's on the record that that is the wrong strategy, and that is the strategy that Justin Trudeau is pursuing. And I want to point out to my friend Matthew Rowlinson, I'm a lawyer. I understand what can and cannot be done with legally binding contracts. Legislation can override those contracts. And at the end of the day, if you're going to talk to me about reality as Kate did, the reality is that we are on the precipice. The science is clear. We need to leave the oil in the ground. So if you're going to be realistic, you're going to have to address that necessity to leave the oil in the ground. Anything else is a departure from reality and is fantasy land. I'm sorry to say.
Okay, thank you, candidates. That was probably the most lively part we've had so far, but I want to get on to the next question, which, as we mentioned earlier, is childcare. And this question is for you, Matthew. Your party leader, Tom Mulcair, said that an NDP government would create hundreds of thousands of new childcare spaces and cap fees at $15 a day by, I believe, 2018-19. The cost, an estimated $1.9 billion. But the plan calls for a 60-40 funding arrangement with the provinces. How do you convince the provinces, many of which are on kind of shaky financial ground, how do you convince them to get on board when this is going to mean more cost for them?
Universal childcare makes everybody richer. Now, the numbers, as I understand them, are 380,000 spaces in a first mandate. And Kate is right. We are proposing to phase this program in a fiscally responsible way. But 380,000 childcare spaces ain't peanuts. It's something that Canadian families are crying out for. And the Liberal plan will create zero. So, yes, we need childcare spaces. I believe the provinces will get on board, because if you look at the history of universal childcare elsewhere, in Quebec, where it already exists, and if you look at it in almost every country in Europe, a childcare program does not only look after the children and the families who use it. It means the parents who are now staying at home, and who inhabit a universe defined by a phrase I hate, I can't afford to work. I can't afford to work because putting my child or my children in care would cost more than I'm going to earn. Somebody in that situation is somebody with talents, somebody with training, somebody who is staying out of the economy because she, and it usually is a she, doesn't have the social infrastructure she needs to allow her to work. If people in that situation will go back into the economy, it increases GDP. Pierre Fortin, an economist at the University of Montreal, says it doesn't just increase GDP, it actually increases government tax revenues, which is to say that it pays for itself. So in the most optimistic forecast, this is actually not going to cost the provinces. But in any case, it does make us all richer. And I believe that when the provinces see that case and see how this system works, they will join with the federal government to form a partnership to establish this program, which Canadians across the country and families here in London West are really crying out for.
Kate, I'm going to go to you first on this, because your party, when it was last in government under Paul Martin, had a national child care strategy in agreement with the provinces that was lost when the NDP and the Conservatives brought the government down. So let's go to you first on this issue of child care and how I suppose your party's approach differs from that of what Mr. Mulcair is suggesting.
Yes, you're right in that it does beg the question, if the New Democrat Party wanted a national child care plan, why did they bring the Liberal government down at that time? So, or why didn't they push to have that come into effect? But they didn't, and so here we are, and many years later, and we have, the Liberal Party has reassessed things, and we have decided that the best way to handle this is to get more money into the pockets of Canadian families. So we are talking about a Canada Child Benefit, and that is that 9 out of 10 Canadian families will receive tax-free checks every month. And that's the difference, because right now Families received a check in the mail from the Conservative government in July, a child tax credit check. But that's taxable, so they're going to have to give a good portion of that money back. What we are suggesting is a tax-free check every month up to $6,400 per child each year. So a two-parent family with 2 kids earning $90,000 will get $490 every month. One-parent family earning $30,000 per year with 1 child will get about $533 per month. And this will lift 315,000 Canadian children out of poverty. This is what we need immediately. We don't need an idea that's going to take so many provinces to be on side, and that's never going to happen, and it's going to take years to get going.
Dimitri, go ahead.
Briefly, the Green Party wants to restore and revamp the 2005 agreement reached between the federal government, provinces, and territories to achieve a universal access child care program in Canada. We think that's absolutely essential. I myself lived in Quebec shortly after my kids were born with my wife, and I can tell you, having had access to child care was a critical benefit to us. And we were amongst the more fortunate members of society at the time, so I'm fully sympathetic towards the creation of a universal access child care program in Canada. Its time has come.
Yes, Matthew, because I know you want to respond to what Kate said about the bringing down of the government, and then once you've responded to that, I'd like you to, I guess, take a moment to just talk about how the $15 a day program would be better than what Kate is suggesting, which some critics have argued is essentially the Harper plan with just a little bit more money.
You're giving my response here.
But first of all, just address what Kate said, and then maybe kind of differentiate between the two plans.
My pleasure. Look, going back to the Paul Martin government, the NDP brought down that government because this country needed a referendum on Liberal corruption. Right? This was the aftermath of the sponsorship scandal. It would have been irresponsible to keep that government in power. Canadians wanted to put a period after that era in Canadian history. And with all respect to Mr. Martin and Mr. Chrétien, both of whom are still alive and both of whom gave a lot to this country, the memory of that period is really tainted by the recollection of the sponsorship scandal. I have no regrets about the NDP bringing down that government. Although a universal child care plan would have been a great thing, and it will be a great thing when the NDP brings it in. Look, we do see here an important philosophical difference between the Liberal Party and the New Democratic Party. The NDP believes in building things. It believes in building programs that are universal, that are available to all of us. And yes, the Harper government, I think the country has suffered enormously from the Harper government's strategy of slicing and dicing the electorate and doling out checks to families whose children play sports, to families of this kind but not to families of that kind. I think, and the Liberal policy, the policy that the Liberals are proposing is more of the same. It's a policy of sending checks, but not building the social infrastructure that families need in order to be able to support themselves, in order to be able to live in society, and to live as part of a universal whole in which we look after each other by building institutions that we share.
Kate, a quick response?
Well, it's certainly, again, I just have to reiterate that it sounds good on paper, but it's not going to mean a thing to children that are at home now, that need child care now. So we need to get money into the pockets of middle income and all Canadians so that they can spend the money as they see fit.
Okay, last question, and this is for you, Dimitri, and this has to deal with governance and with our feelings as Canadian voters. We seem to be, it seems, and maybe with good reason, broken promises, floor crossing, robocalls, majority governments with less than 40% of the popular vote. We've seen it all. So the question is, how do we change that? How do we get more people in this country, in this community, engaged in the process and get them out to vote so that we can finally see voter turnout levels that approach what many of us would find respectable?
I think the number one thing that we can do is to be honest with the electorate. We're not being honest with the electorate. And that dishonesty comes in many forms. Sometimes politicians utter out and out untruths. Other times they put a spin on things which is misleading to the public. What they tend to do more often, though, is they leave out critical information, which the public really needs in order to make informed decisions. What we've now become are robots, and this is particularly true of the Conservative Party. It's every single candidate of the Conservative Party appears to be nothing more than a medium for the PMO. And I'll give you an example, and it's unfortunate for him he's not here to defend himself, but you can see it on camera. On the Rogers debate, I had Ed Holder sitting to my left. I had no notes in front of me for the entire debate because I was there to have an honest and spontaneous and sincere conversation with the voters. He had a script with elaborate flowcharts and a typed out answer for virtually every question that might arise. He's nothing more than a medium by which somebody else's message is being delivered. And that's not what the voters need. They need us to have an honest and sincere and adult conversation about the issues. And then, quite apart from that, we need to get away from the system of governance we currently have, the electoral system. We need a proportional representation system so that everybody's vote counts. And we are 100% committed to that. We need to reform the Senate, which is a mess, and we'd like to have a national consultation process following which there will be a recommendation for reforming it and a referendum. And people will be deciding between two options: abolish the Senate and that recommendation. Because at the end of the day, the Senate right now is really a detriment to Canadian democracy. And the last thing that I think is very important for re-inspiring the electorate and getting them to trust us again as politicians is this whole notion of whipped votes. Right now, the major parties, and this has been their practice historically, unless there's a declaration that some particular vote is a vote of conscience, which very rarely happens, they are obliged, practically or philosophically speaking, to go along with the leadership. Our party says we're going to abolish whipped votes. Every vote in our party will be a vote of conscience. So if I represent the people of London West, I will be free to do what I deem to be in their interests, even if my leader doesn't agree with me.
All right, thank you very much, Dimitri. Let's go to you first on this, Matthew, and I'll essentially ask you the same question. How do we get more people feeling better about the political process and more importantly, feeling better about the people whose names are put on the ballot for them to choose from?
You're right, Scott. These have been rough years for our democracy, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, some have to do with specific abuses by the Conservative government. And I think whipped votes are pretty far down the line. We've had the Harper government proroguing Parliament, essentially bringing the People's Chamber, the People's representative, the business of the People's representative to a halt because he was a political risk. We've had omnibus bills in which cuts to our environmental standards have been pushed through in completely unrelated budgets, undebated. We've had many bills that have been passed through. We had Bill C-51 passed earlier this year. The committee process was cut short. Many witnesses about that bill were not allowed to testify. So our democracy in the last few years has really suffered from the heavy hand of the Prime Minister's office in the government we have. But more broadly, we are living with a 19th century system in a 21st century world. Our political system was devised in the 19th century for a far smaller electorate, a limited electorate, and for a country that was far smaller and far less diverse than it is today. I completely agree with Dimitri. We need to move to a proportional representation system, and I look forward to Green support of an NDP government when we bring one in. The NDP is committed to adopting a mixed member proportional representation system, which will preserve the benefits of our current system in that people will elect representatives from their own area, but will also ensure that all parties are represented in Parliament in the same percentages as they receive votes from the electorate. We need to abolish the Senate. And as Dimitri says, if we have a government that will take a clear position on this, the provinces will go along because the electorate wants it. We've seen, again, the current Conservative Senate has been filled with scandals, but the fundamental problem with the Senate is the way it's designed. It's an undemocratic body. It was designed in the 19th century to solve 19th century problems, and it doesn't do anything for us today.
Kate, does Dimitri have a point about whipped votes? And is that something that it really ought to be at the forefront of the Liberal Party campaign, but certainly something that you would hope your leader would give you the freedom to vote your conscience on every matter, not just specific ones?
Well, there's no question, when I was trying to decide whether to run for the Liberal Party, I wanted to know that I could have a voice for the people of London West, that I wasn't just bringing back the voice from the Hill to London West, that I was going to be able to, it was a two-way street, and I think it must be. And that was very clear, that the Liberal government would be very open to more free votes, and that we would have opportunities that we haven't in the past. Justin Trudeau is very keen on this, and I think that's important. We need to have a more open and democratic government. The Conservatives have almost destroyed our democratic government over the last 10 years, and we have got to rebuild it. Now, this will be, under a Liberal government, the last election that will be first past the post. We know that it's not working, and we will be, if we form a government, we will be setting up discussions across the country about what is the best way to move forward. I'm not sure it's the NDP way. I don't know. We need to have that discussion to decide what is best for Canadians. They must have some input. I also wanted to talk about young people getting involved. It's so incredibly exciting to see Justin Trudeau and how he can walk into a room and get so many young people re-engaged in the electoral system. And I think that bodes well for our future.
Okay, we have about 50 seconds left, and I want to ask you to do a very simple question and get a very simple answer. Floor crossing, should it be allowed? Dimitri?
Yes, people should always be able to act in accordance with their conscience. And I just want to say one thing about Kate's answer. There was no commitment coming from her to the abolition of whipped votes. She talked about more freedom to vote your conscience. No, we're making an ironclad commitment to get rid of whipped votes altogether.
Matthew, floor crossing, should it be allowed?
Yeah, people should be allowed to vote in accordance with their conscience, as Dimitri said. I don't think it'd be a good idea. I'm not going anywhere.
And Kate?
I agree.
Okay.
That's never been a concern of mine.
Okay, well, that is the end of our questions. I want to thank you all for your answers. We're going to move into the closing statement phase of our debate, and we'll go in the reverse order as what we did in the opening statement. So, Dimitri, you'll have 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Well, I started out by saying that sadly it appears that the Liberals and the NDP are determined to more or less toe the line, although they're prepared to break with the Harper government in some marginal respects. Ultimately, they're parties of the status quo, and I want to bring to the attention of our listeners today 2 issues where, again, this becomes clear. I started out by talking about the climate change issue. The one is the problem of student debt. Student debt is becoming increasingly burdensome in this country, and post-secondary education is becoming increasingly inaccessible. We want to abolish tuition fees. And people may say, well, that can't be done. How can we do that? Well, Germany has done it. Germany has the reputation of being the most fiscally responsible country in Europe, and somehow they have managed to offer free education. We want to abolish tuitions for universities, colleges, and skills training programs. The second way in which you can see the status quo nature of the Liberal and the NDP is on trade agreements. Okay, there's an agreement on the table, Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is going to give corporate lawyers the ability to enter judgments against the Canadian government on behalf of multinational corporations whenever the Canadian government adopts legislation which reduces their profitability but benefits Canadians. We are unequivocally opposed to that agreement. The Liberals and the NDP support it. Ultimately, if you want real change, the Green Party is the path for you.
Okay, Matthew, go ahead.
Scott, it's been a real pleasure to be here, and I would have to say this has been a pretty stimulating debate. I hope it's given your listeners a clear picture of the difference between the three of us. I'm really proud to be here as a representative of the NDP, and I'm proud to be running with Tom Mulcair as my leader. And I've got to say, I think that this debate demonstrates that the NDP is the party that has a clear plan to rebuild Canadian democracy, that has a clear plan to build a sustainable economy in this country. We are committed to bringing in mixed member proportional representation system in Canada and reforming our democracy. The Liberals tell us that what the Liberals offer us on issues of democratic reform is consultation. Consultation isn't a plan. The same is true on climate change. The NDP is committed to bringing in a cap and trade system that will put a price on carbon emissions and will lead to a sustainable economy. The Liberals are offering consultations and commissions, but we haven't heard a clear plan. Only Tom Mulcair and the NDP have the leadership and the experience to make the changes we need in this country. We've had 148 years of Liberal and Conservative governments, and over the last 2 decades, this society has become more unequal and less green. We've lost hundreds of thousands of good jobs, and we've become less able to care for those who need it. The NDP is a party unlike the Liberals and Conservatives. It was founded by working men and women, and for its whole history, it's fought for a society where we take care of each other. This year we can elect our first NDP government, and Tom Mulcair's ready. I'm ready, and I'm asking for your listeners' support on October the 19th.
Okay, and Matthew, thank you very much. Kate, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Scott. First, I would like to thank Blackburn Radio for giving us this opportunity to talk about the issues that affect all of us. This election is about our future and our children's children's future. Canadians know that we can always do better. You want change. We hear that loud and clear, and I believe a Liberal government is offering the change that we need now. This election is a clear choice between a government that wants to make smart investments that create jobs and growth, or austerity measures and cuts that will slow the economy further. Confident, optimistic countries invest in their future. Better is always possible. And the Liberal plan is fully costed. Only Liberals have a plan to put more money in families' pockets to help with the high cost of raising their kids, and by investing in the social infrastructure that gives all Canadians a real and fair chance at success. When you have an economy that works for the middle class, you have a country that works for everyone. The people of London West need a voice in Ottawa and not the other way around. I would be honored to be that voice, and we offer a real positive difference for London West, and that's why I'm asking for your vote. Thank you very much.
Candidates, thank you so much for coming in today. We really appreciate it. Dimitri Lascaris of the Green Party of Canada, Matthew Rowlinson of the New Democratic Party of Canada, Kate Young of the Liberal Party of Canada. Thank you again for coming in. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the debate, and thank you for running as well and being involved in the process. It's very much appreciated. We hope this has been informing for you, the voter. Thanks for watching, and by all means, on October 19th, get out and vote.